All right, we are here, everybody. Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody.
I am joined by the lovely and talented. That's your cue
Uh,
to mention your name. Let's try that again. Take two. I am joined by the lovely and talented.
Scott Wilson. I was actually expecting you to say my name. That's why I was
Okay.
waiting.
Oh, I was setting you up, man. I'm setting you
Right.
up. Okay. So I'm joined by Scott Wilson, and I am the unlovely and untalented Stevie Stroh. Welcome to our first episode of the new year. Happy 2023, everybody. It's been a couple weeks, or feels like it's been a couple weeks since we did our Christmas special, and I figured this is a good episode to let's just talk about what we've been doing since the Christmas break, and then next week we'll get into some more reviewing of things and some news and whatnot. So, by the way, Happy New Year, Scott.
Happy New Year, Steve.
Happy New Year, audience, whoever's watching us live or listens or watches later. So what have you been doing since our last episode, Scott? What have you been up to? What have you been watching? What have you been doing? What have you been collecting? Anything good?
Well, I'll start with the most recent first. I went to see that new horror movie, Megan, yesterday, which I quite enjoyed. It's of the Child's Play trilogy of terror ilk, Killer Toys, Killer Dolls, with also what I call the AI paranoia thrown in there. That's, AI paranoia. I think the first movie I'd probably label as that is maybe 2001: A Space Odyssey. I don't know. Anything with
Right, right. The first one that me comes to mind in modern times is like the Terminator, right? Skynet
yeah,
takes over the world, but that trope has been around for a long time. But I think in the public awareness, I think Terminator is probably the first one that comes to mind. But yeah, HAL 9000, definitely. I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that right now, right? So AI gone run amok.
right,
Computers taking over the world is a huge, concern in science fiction, right?
right. One of the well, especially I'd say, especially since the induction of cyberpunk and those kind of subgenres, yeah, that's definitely a concern. I think it speaks to just our growing dependence on technology as each era passes. As we get older, as the world gets older, it gets more and more dependent on technology. But that's what I did yesterday. As far as just overall, it's kind of been I've kind of had a low pop culture profile as of late. There hasn't really been a lot that I've really done the deep dive into. I bought a few action figures, uh, watched a lot of YouTube clips, trying to keep but yeah, I mean, since Avatar was like the last big sort
Right,
of
right, right, right.
sort of big sort of big deal, but I'm mostly just sort of anticipating what I think 2023 will will bring down the pipe. I can speak on what I want to get into. There's a anime series on Hulu called Chainsaw Man that I keep hearing a whole lot about. My friends who still watch a lot of anime, they're talking about that.
Okay.
So I want to definitely dive into that. I want to dive into Willow, which I've heard a lot of great things about.
Yeah, Willow's been good.
I definitely want to Marvel Comics. While this is on my mind, because I'm looking directly at a Predator action figure I just bought maybe last week. Marvel Comics has a new Predator series out.
Interesting.
Yeah, because they have Disney has the 20th Century Fox license, so I think Marvel also has a Planet of the Apes comic coming.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
so anything Disney has the license for, because anybody who's been reading Marvel or is like in my age range or your age range or even older remembers that Marvel used to have quite a few licenses going back to the 70s and 80s. They had Star Wars. They even had Indiana Jones for a
Right.
while.
They were really only one of two publishers. There was Marvel and there was DC. There wasn't really a lot of mainstream independent
Independent,
comic publishers in the 70s and 80s because
right?
in the production and distribution cost was just way too much. Yeah, Marvel did Star Wars. Marvel did Indiana Jones. Marvel did
Conan.
yeah, Conan. Well, Marvel did Conan before the comics. I mean, before the movie.
Yeah.
And so Conan is based on I'm not sure if it's based on art. What was the artist's name for like Frank Frazetta? What was his name?
Frank
Frazetta.
Frazetta.
So I'm not sure if Conan was based on his paintings because I remember him being in like a lot of the famous monsters magazines and heavy metal magazines and that other Vampirilla
I think
magazine and
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how the timeline works. I know Conan was created by, was it Robert E. Howard? I'm trying to remember
but
his
Conan was based on a book, I think, if
a,
nothing
se-
else.
a series of a series of short stories by that writer. And Conan was kind of one of the properties that sort of, before Star Wars came out, there were a few geek properties that kind of lit the that sort of were heating up the pot, so to speak, for Star Wars to boil the pot over.
Okay.
Conan was one of those things, along with Dungeons and Dragons and Star Trek and
Right.
the Planet of the Apes, that kind of, it showed that there was a fan base there. But then Star Wars came along and showed just how much money that fan base can generate.
Right,
So
right, right. But I don't think. But Marvel did invent Conan. Marvel did Conan
no,
comics,
yeah, they didn't invent it. That
but
was a
I don't think that was he was not an original property of theirs. But yeah, Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer and all those things. Those were comic strips or a series of comic books for a long time.
yeah, and they also Dark Horse Comics had the Star Wars license for years and years. I think maybe even decades. They also had Aliens. They had Predator. They had yeah, Alien, Star Wars, Aliens, Predator were the main ones that I remember.
Right.
And but then Marvel got the Star Wars license back. I think it was it 2013 or 14. And now that Disney owns 20th Century Fox,
Right.
now they have Aliens and they have Predator
Yep.
and
Yep. Yep. Yep.
and and they have Planet of the Apes come. There have been some actually great. I can't remember the publisher's name, but maybe about a decade ago, there was some great Planet of the Apes comics from a certain independent publisher. So that that property has a pretty solid history with comic book adaptations and things of that nature. But the Predator comic is actually not that bad. And back in the dark times when there weren't many Predator movies after Predator 2, and there was, the character didn't, I don't think, made another appearance in movies until Aliens versus Predator. If you had to get your fix from Dark Horse.
Right. Right. And if, I have not looked at a lot of Dark Horse productions, but I know they do top notch. Right. The storytelling, the artwork,
Yeah.
the coloring, almost like graphic novel level. But yeah, Dark Horse has always produced a good quality comic.
Right, and I'm kind of wondering what they're going to be doing now, because, like, a lot of those major licenses got taken away, but they had Hellboy, they had some great independent titles, so
Right.
they'll probably be fine. But yeah, that's I just went to my local comic shop the other day, and that would be Collectors Comics in this area. I went there yesterday to do my weekly rounds with them, and you know that's really what I'm kind of more looking forward to now. Is I sort of like things that allow my imagination to be more active. Sometimes TV and movies don't really engage your imagination in the same way that a book or a comic book can engage
Right.
imagination. So that's more where my head has been at. I'm still actually I'm also I'm realizing as we're doing this show, because I'm trying to think of newer things that I'm watching, but no, I'm just going to talk about everything. Uh, yeah, that's just, my mind tends to have tunnel vision when it comes to certain things. So when we're talking about the new year, I'm thinking, okay, new stuff. Well, no, there's
Right.
a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of stuff that I watch as comfort food. People who know me know that uh, when certain movies start making the rounds, older movies start making the rounds on like the streaming services, they know that I'm going to have that on as perpetual background noise for the entire month. One of those movies is the Cape Fear remake that Scorsese did with Nick Nolte and De Niro.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
another one is this movie called Roadhouse with Patrick Swayze.
Right.
I
It's
don't.
time to be nice.
Yeah.
We'll be
Uh,
nice until it's time to not be nice. Is that how it goes?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of my
Right.
favorite movies.
Right.
I sort of have a fondness for 80s action movies that have a, if you pardon the phrase, like, well, this movie is basically about a philosophical bouncer at a shit kicker bar.
Okay.
And a lot of people may not know what that phrase means.
What, shit kicker or
Yeah,
philosophical?
take your pick. Take your pick. Take your pick.
Yeah. He's philosophical bouncer is a great way to. What was his name? What was his character's name? Was it Dallas?
Uh, Dalton. Dalton.
Dalton. Right. So yeah, he had a code, right, where he was the guy. He was like a cleaner. He was the guy you called in when all else has failed. And I guess he had a history and a reputation of being the
For
cleanup
bars. Yeah.
crew, the problem solver. And so, yeah, and this, whatever this town is, and we talk about a shit kicker, so we're talking about a podunk redneck town. Let's just call a spade here. But,
Right.
so it's a bunch of shit kickers is a bunch of wild up, Riley white guys, right, who are just starting shit, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, so he has to come in and clean up and clean house, right? Of course, and you're going to be stepping on toes and ruffling feathers and kicking ass and taking names. But what was great about it was you mentioned this was an 80s movie, which it absolutely was, but it wasn't like, when you think of ass kicking movies in the 80s, there's two names that come to mind, right? Like Steven Seagal and Jean-Claude Van Damme, right? But those were guys who literally did nothing but just kick ass, and they just kicked ass. Whereas Patrick Swayze's character was a guy where, like he said, he had a saying, we're going to be nice. Right? If they're going to do this, we're going to let it happen and we're going to be nice. Well, until when? Well, until it's time to not be nice, right? You know what I mean? So he had a code. He had, like you say, he was philosophical. He wasn't just about, hey, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm going to beat you up, right? He tried to walk a higher road. And that made his character interesting. That made that movie interesting. And it's just great. There's so many memorable lines. Every time somebody sees him for the first time, man, I thought you'd be taller, things like that, Yeah.
And you also had the wrestler Terry Funk was in there. He was one of the heavies. He was one of the henchmen of the bad guys.
Okay.
And he was the one who looked. Basically, he was the first guy in the bar who looked at Dalton and said, "You don't look like much to me." And then Dalton ended up firing him in the next scene. But I
Right.
love the movie. The movie is from a name you've heard me mention before. The producer of the film is a guy named Joel Silver, the guy behind Die Hard, Predator, Lethal Weapon, The Matrix, The Last Boy Scout. And this was sort of, I think, his Patrick Swayze vehicle because Patrick had made prior to that, I think, just 2 years prior, he made Dirty Dancing. And then the next year, he would make Ghost.
Right,
Uh,
which were not ass-kicking movies.
well, that's the interesting
There were
thing about
good movies
right,
in their own right, but for him
right.
being the kind of leading man, action hero type guy that he can be, the fact he chose those roles, like Ghost was a love story. Dirty Dancing, again, a love story, but he was still great at doing those things too.
And if we were to look at the tail of the tape, as they say in boxing, Dirty Dancing and Ghost were his biggest hits. Those were runaway smashes.
Right.
Those
You,
were,
you know what that reminds me of is that when the rock groups, like your heavy metal and your hard rock groups, they all had to do a ballad, and
yeah.
and the dudes hated the ballads. I love the band Foreigner. I cannot stand the song I Want to Know What Love Is. Every time I hear that, I'm like, next. I don't want to hear Journey's love songs. You know what I mean? But the women do.
And I'll bet you those songs probably sold more
Made
than
the most
anything else.
right because women listen to them as well, right? So no, I get it, but as a dudes want to hear and watch dude stuff, and chicks like the chick stuff. So
Yeah, and Patrick Swayze, I mean, he had another genre classic, not just Roadhouse, but another action genre classic was Point Break that he did with Keanu Reeves, and that was Keanu's first action. That's one of my very favorite action movies.
Yeah, Point Break, which would become the template for the first Fast and the Furious, right? Brody, people trusted you, Brody, and they died. You got to go down. I am an FBI agent. Right? Yeah, Special Agent Utah, Gary Busey, right? Oh, Point Break, classic movie where Anthony Kiedis from the Red Hot Chili Peppers has a cameo in there. And, great movie at a great time. Yeah, and Patrick Swayze, and what were they called? The presidents?
The dead presidents.
The dead presidents, right? They all wore the masks of the different presidents when they robbed the banks.
Well, and the interesting thing is just that Patrick Swayze, although he was known, really, to be honest, he was known more as a romantic leading man than an action star, but he was so effective. He also had another movie, I think Liam Neeson was in it, called Next of Kin, that I remember as a kid I kind of liked.
I remember the name. I don't remember the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, he did a few. Patrick did a few B movies, a few lower tier movies. But I remember when he died, I was very because I loved him so much as Bodie in Point Break and his Dolphin
Yeah.
Boathouse. I remember being
Brody. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I remember feeling kind of hurt when he died. Like that guy. I remember he's one of those guys. Looking at him, was like you could have did a lot more. You could.
Oh yeah.
You had
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
more
Just
in you.
plucked before his prime. Absolutely. Taken from us far too soon.
But yeah, but Roadhouse. Yeah, I like the movie. I even like the music. It's not necessarily my kind of. Anybody who knows me knows it's not necessarily my type of music. But it had the Jeff Healey band.
Yeah, Jeff Healey, who's a blind blues player. He's blind in real life, and he played a blind guy in the movie too, right? Which is a real stretch, right?
And here's the thing. Like, so obviously you know about this group. I don't know much about them. I just know I like their music in this movie. And I like them because another one of my favorite directors, Walter Hill, who made 48 Hours, Warriors. He also had, if you look at 48 Hours, there's like the scene in the country western bar, and he had this black group in there. I think it was a blues group called the Bus Boys, and they had a song on the soundtrack called "The Boys Are Back in Town."
Right, which was Eddie Murphy's opening song too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
That's what I know. The more from Eddie Murphy's special. Yeah.
But there's just something about that.
Yeah.
I have an affinity for like these 80s action movies that have scenes in sort of these bars
Yeah.
where there's like blues music playing. I don't know why. I just
Right, but when you think about it, when you talked about the shit kicking bar that he had to clean up, the band was behind like chicken wire. So the entire stage was covered in a wire mesh because of broken bottles and debris flying around the bar, just to show you how wild and rambunctious that bar could get. That was just the thing. Right. I've never been to a bar where the stage was behind a protective cage.
Dude, I'm not going to stay and party somewhere with this chicken wire trying to protect the guys who perform. No,
right.
thanks.
And I've been to like legit biker bars, and they weren't anywhere near as fearsome as the bar in that movie.
Well, that's what's funny. That's what's funny about Roadhouse is that it's completely ridiculous when you think about it. It's like the sage master bouncer. This guy in the movie, they say that Dalton has a degree in philosophy from NYU, and I'm thinking, why would a guy like that have a degree in philosophy? But he just does. That's the movie he's in. In this movie, you have this superhero bouncer who has a degree in philosophy, and he does katas and yoga and tai chi and
right, and just to set him apart from the typical 80s action hero like your Seagals and Van Dammes, I guess, and even like your Schwarzeneggers, right? So he's a more interesting character. They built him up to be.
And Sam Elliott has a great supporting role.
Oh, he is so good in everything he does. I love Sam Elliott.
And also kind of almost a cameo, Keith David has a role in there. Yeah, Keith David has a role in there. He's I think he's a barista.
Okay.
A bartender in there. But he doesn't have but do you know who I'm talking about when I say Keith David?
The name's ringing a bell, but I can't pull a face to the name now.
They Live. He was Roddy Piper's partner in They Live.
Okay, still not helping me. I hear what you're saying, but it's not. The bell's not ringing.
Oh boy. Okay.
And that's my bad.
Pitch Black. I can run off a bunch of films, but if you ever heard his voice, there's something about Mary. If you ever heard his voice, you'd know exactly who.
Okay, yeah, I just pulled up his picture. Okay,
yeah.
I just googled his ass. Yep, found him. Yep, now I know exactly who you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah, he has a very small role in Roadhouse.
And he does the voice of the he does one of the voices of the alien species in the Halo franchise. So I forget what they're called, the Harbingers or the whatever. But yeah. Okay, yeah, he's got a really cool voice too. So he does voice work as well as just being a flesh and blood actor. He's also a voice actor.
Yeah, great voice actor. He did the voice of Spawn on the Spawn cartoon on HBO.
Yeah.
But
the Arbiter is what he was called in Halo franchise. The Arbiter.
Right.
Is having a brain fart on that name. Yeah.
But it was Roadhouse, one of my all-time favorites. So
for anybody watching, I'll just pull this over here real quick to the live stream. There he is, Keith David, American actor. Boom.
Yeah, he's one of those guys. Whenever I see him in a movie, I automatically, the movie might suck, but at least he's in it.
Yeah,
he's one of those guys.
It's like Samuel L. Jackson. No matter what the movie is, he will be gold. His parts will be gold, and He may be flakes of gold in an otherwise, floating turd, but his moments will be golden. So, Scott appears to be frozen on the Zoom call.
Yes, and I can still hear you.
Okay, well your picture has frozen, but if you can talk, just keep on talking.
Hello.
Yeah, I got a copy on you. All right, so Scott has frozen on Zoom. We'll give him a minute to rejoin us here. I want to talk about what I've been up to, but I want to save Scott to give his 2 cents back in too. Scott, if you can hear me, why don't you try to hang up and call back? As we type that in the okay, here we go. Is he coming? Is he coming? Is he going? Scott Wilson, unmute.
I'm right here.
Okay, he is unmuted. I see you. Okay, we're back. We're back.
Okay.
You're back. Okay.
I'm not sure what that was about because my internet connection is pretty solid.
Okay.
Okay.
No worries. So we were talking about Keith David?
Yeah, Keith David.
Yeah.
Always a welcome presence. I mean, I also watched, I don't know if I mentioned this on the last show, an old Steve McQueen movie called Bullet. Did I mention that on the last show?
I don't remember. Last show, like I say, it seems like Christmas was like a good 2 weeks ago, and I think it was. But yeah, and it feels like a million things have happened since then in my life. So
right.
Yeah.
But the classic Steve McQueen movie Bullet has a classic car chase in it. It's considered by many to be the first action movie.
Okay.
The first modern action movie was made in I think 1968, and it's one of Steve McQueen is just. He's one of the guys you think of when you think of the term movie star.
Right, and most of his movies were, him being a super macho dude in fast muscle cars and guns.
And Bullet is, I think, Bullet might be the movie that really set the pace for that. And it's one of those movies when you watch and you realize how many other movies over the last 50 or so or 60 years ripped it off. It's one of those kind of movies. You realize, oh, okay, so. This movie I was just watching the other day took pieces from Bullet.
Right.
That took pieces from Bullet. It's very, very fascinating when you look at it. Just I'm always fascinated by that, like the movies or the things that are pioneering or were the first to do something, because it's always a different experience watching those after you've seen all the carbon copies.
Yeah. One of the things that was running through my mind when I'm looking at certain things that are being remade, and I get that sometimes when we remake things, we somehow they feel the need to update things for the current generation, right? And we have to update this movie because we need to make it accessible to the current generation and relevant to the current generation. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but what I really wish in a perfect utopian scenario is rather than remaking a movie and trying to update it to the current generation, why not have the current generation watch the original movie as it was and get some historical context and get an appreciation for. Because one of the things I like about watching older movies is they're time capsules. Not only is it a time capsule on how movies used to be and how they were written and directed and performed, but when you look at the cars and the vehicles and you look at New York from 1970 or 1980 versus what New York looks like now. Like the movie Scarface shows parts of Miami before it became South Beach. I was born and raised in Miami, and I remember those areas out there like around Lincoln and these different areas when early 80s Miami versus, and I haven't seen Miami in 20 or 30 years now since I moved away. So part of it is the time capsule. Part of it is realizing in the context of this movie might seem tame today, but in 1970, this was cutting edge. And to be able to have that conversation with newer generations and to give them a richer appreciation would be great. I realize that's real pie in the sky, but the quick road is to just say, let's just remake a movie and make it accessible. Let's do the hashtag-y, TikTok-y version of a classic movie so, the Instagram generation can stay interested. And yeah, that's going to put seats in the theater and sell some tickets, but I really wish there was more of an artsy, cultural, historical preservation / interest in the past. That's really hard to do. You almost have to be a film fanatic to want to do that versus just wanting to see a movie that's spoon fed to me. You know.
Well, what I've noticed, and this happened to me as a throughout my life. The older I get, and this began sometime in my 20s, but once you become an adult, that's when you start developing an ability to appreciate that which came before your time. Kids and teenagers, children, preteens, teenagers generally don't have that skill. That's a skill that starts to develop, I think, once you're about maybe 22 to 25 years old. You start to develop a curiosity for that which came before you. So that's the dilemma I think a lot of these studios and corporations run into, if you know what I mean.
Right, right. And so let's talk about like when I was a kid, when I was even like 6, 7 years old, I was watching the horror movies that were made in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and so I kind of grew up on some movie and television culture and history because especially I remember like being a kid in the 70s. There wasn't enough new television content on the 2 or 3 networks that were out there. So most of what you had during the day was reruns. So Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best. All these things were on. The Brady Bunch was, I think, still new, but we were watching 10, 20-year-old stuff in reruns on TV because there wasn't enough. We didn't have like 400 channels and 24 hours a day of content. So even in my youth, I was still watching older things because at that time, older movies and older shows were still in syndication because there wasn't enough new stuff to fill a 12-hour television programming day.
Right.
Yeah, and those times are gone.
I kind of have a nostalgia for those times because when things weren't so readily available, I feel like I valued them more when you finally got your hands on them. There was something special about watching HBO as a kid back in those days that you just don't get because now everything is so readily accessible. Everything is at your fingertips. You don't have to go to a video store to rent a movie. You don't have to go to a movie theater and buy a ticket. You can just watch a movie literally on your phone.
Yeah.
Sometimes day and date of release, like or release on multiple platforms at once. There's just a lot. I don't want to sound like the proverbial old man telling everybody else to get off his lawn. But I think that the media that we consume now, I think that it's a little less. It's not valued in the same way by the target audience as when we were kids, because we had to actually physically go out someplace, buy something, and bring it back home, or go watch something at a theater.
Mm-hmm. And then you had to remember it.
Yeah, you had to remember
because you couldn't watch it over and over again. So you had to freeze frame that in your mind.
You remember the Rocky movies. I remember it was always so convenient in the beginning of each Rocky movie. They had that brief recap of the match from the last one.
Right.
And that always came in handy. Of course, in franchise movies these days, it's not as necessary anymore.
Right. All right, so let's move past Patrick Swayze. What else have you been up to?
Right. I thought we already moved past him.
Okay. Honestly, I don't remember, but that's okay.
Right.
You're talking about the anime. You're looking forward to watching the anime stuff.
Yeah. Chainsaw Man. Definitely looking forward to watching that. Looking forward to watching Willow. Looking forward to. This just popped into my head. The trailer for Indiana Jones, the new Indiana Jones movie came out.
Yeah, that's.
And I'm a little gun shy about that one because Lucas and Spielberg are not involved. This is the first one. I think Lucas, Spielberg, and John Williams will not be involved, and it's like I just cannot imagine Indiana Jones without his creators involved somehow. I just can't. And I'm trying to build up enthusiasm. And it's just not there, if you know what I mean.
Well, I've seen the trailer, and I'm sold on the trailer, and I'm gonna see it, and hope that I'm not gonna go in there expecting to be disappointed. So I'm gonna go in there with open heart and open mind, and I feel I will be entertained. Now, to be fair, I was not blown away by the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Crystal Skull.
Yeah, to me that one jumped the shark. but it was still entertaining. But I could nitpick on everything I didn't like about it. And this is, again, we talk about AI taking over and technology running amok. One of the things that was great about the second Indiana Jones, even the first one, like when he fell into the pit of snakes, those were real snakes. When in the second one, when they're going through those areas of all the bugs and the chicks, getting all the centipedes in her hair and all the bugs on the ground and walking on us a floor that's full of roaches and whatnot, those were all real. That was practical effects. And then we get to the Crystal Skull, everything is CG. And that's what I didn't like about episode 1. Episode 1 was computer-generated lizards fighting computer-generated robots. There's no way to be invested in that. So there's, the scenes of the computer-generated giant ants in the jungle that's chasing them and all the threats. It's, even though CG looks good, as a audience viewer that there's nothing there. And so they're running, they're on a blue screen and they're running away from nothing. And an artist put a bunch of ants in there. And to me, that takes me out of I don't feel like they're in any threat. Even though it's a movie,
right?
And you have to suspend disbelief. But too much CG used the wrong way to me can ruin things. So that's just one of my many things I didn't like about the Crystal Skull. But it was a decent story. But I am hoping that they will learn from those lessons, and that this is definitely going to be his last one. So hopefully he'll go out in a bang and leave that legacy, ending it on a high note, and hopefully redeeming the fourth movie.
I mean, I'll be going to see it too.
Yeah.
But, it's one of those things that if Disney, I know the property is too lucrative. The Indiana Jones brand, Disney's probably looking at it as though it's too lucrative to just let it sort of die on the vine.
You got to look at Harrison Ford's age. He turned 80 last year. Now, yeah, he's still physically fit, but he's not going to be able to do stuff forever. And at some point in time, he's going to want to actually retire. At some point in time, studios are not going to want to risk that's kind of my concern. And this is, I know it sounds morbid or inhuman, but when somebody reaches a certain age, they have a lot less days in front of them than they do behind them. And if I was a studio, because I know he's supposedly going to be playing in something with the MCU, where he might end up becoming Thunderbolt Ross and becoming the Red Hulk. And what happens if he does one movie and does that, and then he has health issues and he can't do anymore? How are they going to move forward? Kind of like what happened with T'Challa, right? And Chadwick. So my concern would be, as much as I'm a huge fan of Harrison Ford, just knowing how old he is, I would be really concerned about any new franchise he's going to start, because unfortunately we don't know how long he's going to be left with us.
I'm more concerned because I think, if I remember correctly, I think he has a record of getting hurt lately. I know when he was making Force Awakens, I think he got hurt on the set somehow, or during a flying accident or something.
Well, yeah, because he's a private pilot too, and he crashed his plane infamously, years ago, and hurt himself in that plane crash because he landed not on an airfield, but somewhere out in the woods.
And also, I mean, there's also a feeling. I mean, I felt like the original trilogy of Indiana Jones films, even though people didn't initially like Temple of Doom, I think Temple of Doom gets more love now than it probably got. Because I remember initially Temple of Doom was considered something of a disappointment. A lot of fans didn't like it. But I like that trilogy of films. I mean, Raiders, of course, is a all-time classic of any genre.
Yeah.
Of any genre. But I like those three movies. I like Last Crusade, which was basically putting not just the character of Indiana Jones together with the character of his father, but it was also the father of Indiana Jones in a more metaphorical, figurative sense, because Indiana Jones was largely inspired by James Bond. So that was really the whole reason that Spielberg agreed to do Indiana Jones, was because he wanted to do after Jaws, he wanted to do a James Bond movie. And at the time, he didn't have the clout to where he could just simply command that. And whoever had the rights, whatever studio was in control, they didn't want to give him the job, even though Jaws had been the biggest movie in the world up until that point. And he wanted to do a James Bond movie.
I think James Bond was MGM, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Metro Goldwyn Mayer, yeah.
Yeah, and they didn't want him to do it. And then he was telling Lucas about that, and Lucas said, "Well, I have something that could probably be better. It's about this archaeologist, and he goes around on these adventures, and he fights Nazis and what have you." And so, Last Crusade was kind of cool in that it was like,
Yeah, it kind of brought closure 360 on that one there. Absolutely. And it was
yeah,
yeah, it was probably I think it's everybody's pecking order on favorites varies. I think the first one obviously has to be the all-time favorite because it was the first, but then do you pick the second one as your second favorite or your third as your second favorite? That's going to depend on the individual. I think I would probably pick the third as my second favorite and the second as my third favorite. And then the fourth as my fourth favorite. So yeah, Crystal Skull would be at the bottom of the list.
yeah. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to that new Mission Impossible movie that's coming out. The Mission Impossible series. It's funny with those movies; they never have much replay value for me. Usually, they're one and done. But while I'm watching them, I really enjoy them. But I just don't ever feel the desire to revisit any of them. The
Yeah, and
way,
I remember you posting that, and that got me thinking. And I've tried watching a few of them, especially ones that I don't remember seeing. I could watch one, maybe not year after year. God bless you, but I think I could watch one, a couple years later. The one thing I will say I did like about them, which I think the original series did too, is they were always trying to show you the latest greatest tech, even if some of that tech was slightly science fictiony. But like even like in the James Bond was infamous for showing you the coolest new sports car before it was available to the public. And the cool speedboats and the one man underwater submarine. So all this kind of cool gadget and techs and vehicles James Bond movies were infamous for, and I believe Mission Impossible too. Like when they show like pulling off the mask, and the mask would like vaporize into smoke, and the self-erasing tapes and all that kind of stuff. And so showing like all the various Nokia phones and computer hacking, like hacking into computer systems and all these things. So they were always showing us kind of a little bit of futurism in the tech that was just grounded in 6 months down the road, this is what phones are going to look like, but we're showing them to you now. So that was a cool thing. The whole cloak and dagger element was pretty cool. But yeah, I don't know that I could do like a marathon binge of watching all of them. But I think like maybe once every couple of months I can maybe watch them. I could do a long-term binge where I can maybe binge the thing in maybe 6 months time or something once every 2 years.
yeah, I mean, like I said, I enjoy them a lot
Yeah.
while I'm watching them. But
Yeah, as a matter
it's
of fact, it was after I saw Top Gun Maverick when I just realized how much of a freaking badass Tom Cruise is. I hate to say it. I hate to sound like a gushing fanboy, but I gotta be honest. I mean, Tom Cruise can do no wrong on anything
well,
he's done.
well,
So
especially the Mission Impossible films, and I think maybe even Top Gun Maverick. Uh, the Mission Impossible films are done through his production company, so they're his babies.
yeah,
So he has a lot. He has a lot of say in the decision making process. Um, and I know he's very particular about his image and how he's presented to the public. So I know he plays a big role in those kind of things. So yeah, it's good to know that he's that dedicated.
yeah, absolutely. Concerned about his legacy and his image, as he should be, and as I think Harrison Ford probably has become. Why he resisted Star Wars sequels and why he said, "Listen, if I'm going to do one more, you got to kill me,"
Right.
because I'm done with this shit. So, yeah, but yeah, having that level of concern for your image and your legacy and your properties is a good trait.
Right.
Let me interject just a little bit, and I'll talk about some of the things that I've been doing on the break, and then we can go back and forth. But you were talking about how the young people can't appreciate things or appreciate history, which I can get, but I think it's a moving target as you get older. The older you get, the more nostalgic you get too. And when you're under 30, you haven't been alive long enough to be nostalgic, right? But I am completely nostalgic for things that I grew up on or did at different phases of my life, and if I really love them, then hopefully they've stuck with me. So comic books, movies, video games, things like that. And one of the nostalgia fixes, and one of my things I've been a huge fan of since like 1995 when it first came out. But the whole Tomb Raider franchise and the Tomb Raider legacy. So while we haven't been having time to do episodes a lot, I have been doing some random live video game streaming, and I've been playing a lot of the Tomb Raider video games. And those are just, when Tomb Raider came out on the PlayStation in like 1995 or whenever that came out, that was just revolutionary. It's talking about Indiana Jones, right? And how
Right.
Indiana Jones revolutionized the movie and the action hero. Tomb Raider was like a modern female Indiana Jones for the next generation. And, going on adventures and solving mysteries and doing archaeological things, all that kind of stuff. That was Lara Croft. That is Lara Croft. She is a badass female Indiana Jones. And so that whole idea in a video game, especially giving you that kind of three-dimensional, first or third person perspective of exploring these worlds and doing these challenges and doing all the physical things like jumping and climbing and parkouring and swinging on vines and all these things, was just super cool. And so I didn't play as many of the Tomb Raider games during their first 4 or 5 games. I had them, I was a fan of them, but I wasn't completely entrenched in them. When I really got hooked was around 2005-ish, so maybe 10 years later, when the second generation of Tomb Raider games came out. And for me, that was on the Xbox 360. And there was like 3 or 4 of them that came out that were like next gen at that time. And that's when I became a Tomb Raider addict. And I played all the second generation, Tomb Raider Underworld, Tomb Raider Legends, things like that. And so the graphics were better. The scope and scale of what you did was bigger, and it became much more cinematic. So I've been a huge fan since like 2005. And then when they rebooted Tomb Raider again in 2013 and they did the origin story, that game is probably my all-time favorite game. And that's when I started streaming, because it's fun to play. It plays out like a movie. It plays out like a story. It is like an R-rated Indiana Jones because you're dealing with supernatural stuff. People are getting killed. It's high stakes. And so kind of having that nostalgia fix of playing that Tomb Raider game. And then that made me want to go back and watch the original Tomb Raider movie with Angelina Jolie. And honestly, that movie, even though I forgot what year it came out, early 2000s, it holds up today as a really good action movie. And it is true to the Tomb Raider franchise going back to 1995 of her being this, dual pistol, gun-wielding, badass chick explorer, archaeologist. I feel like that first Angelina Jolie movie was perfection, not only as a movie, but of encapsulating everything that 20 years of that Tomb Raider franchise or 15 years of that franchise had stood for. And it's a great movie to watch. So this kind of getting that nostalgia fix and for one of my most video games that I'm the most in love with was kind of fun in these past couple of weeks.
Well, I haven't seen the movie in ages. I think I ended up seeing that twice for reasons I can't even remember. I think I may have seen it by myself the first time and then went with a date the second time. I can't really remember much about that movie, so I can't really offer an opinion on it. But I remember the game when it first came out. A good friend of mine, Howard Gow, he actually not just a good friend of mine. That guy's like family to me. He's my brother. Been my brother for over 30 years. I remember when he first bought it back in the holiday season of '96. And I remember getting home and watching him play it. I didn't play it. He had a Sega. Was it a?
It would have been the Sega Saturn.
Sega Saturn, yeah.
Yeah.
He had a Sega Saturn and he was playing it on there. And I remember there was him being in some mansion or house and there was a bear loose in there and he couldn't get out. And this guy was playing it for like over an hour. And I'm like, dude, would you turn this off and play another game? But that was the thing. He was one of those gamers. He would keep playing something for hours until
Yeah, that's Croft Manor. And yeah, so she's got a backstory. She's got, there's a whole thing. There's a whole history. So it's an interesting character that's gotten more interesting with each new video game sequel over 1995. We're almost in 2025. So we're looking at going on close to 30 years that's been around. But yeah, so her father was Lord Richard Croft. He's, obviously like a millionaire or gazillionaire or something because he's got that big manor. He was a famous historian and archaeologist, and so she's kind of following in his footsteps. There's mystery behind the death of her mother and father, and those stories play out differently in the different iterations on what caused them and things like that. But yeah, it's been really interesting. It's not your typical video game where you're just in here to shoot stuff and kill stuff. So she was a character with a backstory, with a history, with a legacy before you even start the game, and there's a little bit of James Bond to it as well. Some Cloak and Dagger, going up against evil, or in the movie they call it the Illuminati, is what they called it in the Angelina Jolie movie. In the newer games now, the evil corp is called Trinity, right? And so Trinity, and if you ever played Assassin's Creed, it's kind of like the Assassins versus the Templars, right? So Trinity is kind of like the Templars in the Assassin's Creed universe. So yeah, the fact that there's all this mythology built into it and this history, and how it's dealing with, Indiana Jones type archaeological adventures is just a cool concept. And the newer games play out so cinematically, and the scope and the scale and the intense, like you are doing stuff in the game that's like a big action sequence in a movie, and it's all happening in real time, and you're like seeing yourself, kind of like, being chased by the giant stone ball that Indiana Jones did in the first movie. There's that level of shenanigans going on all the time, where there's these earth-shattering events that you're just trying to parkour and survive and jump and hop and swing through as it's happening, and it plays out like an action movie sequence. And then there's the whole story and the exploration, so there's a lot to it. So I'm a big fan, and I've been reliving those feels these past couple weeks.
Yeah, that's really cool. One of these days, I'm planning on doing that with maybe Mike Tyson's Punch Out or Contra or something. Going back. 'Cause I've never been one of those guys to revisit older games because from my experience, it's really the more serious gamers who are into the sort of revisiting games from past systems and past eras. But no, that should be kind of interesting, because Tomb Raider has definitely been around for a while.
Yeah.
I still remember that the holiday season of '96. I remember going to see him in Georgia, and then we went to pick him up from work, and then we went right to Walmart, and he bought with his paycheck. He bought he's working in a travel agency. I remember he bought Tomb Raider, and just seeing him here. And I mean, to this day, Howard is like the best guy I've ever seen at video games. I mean, he will learn combinations on a fighting game faster than anyone. He'll learn special moves faster than anyone. He's one of those guys that would get Electronic Gaming Monthly,
right?
And within a week, he knew every combo.
Right. Well, so there's two components to that are impressive if you're impressed with that kind of stuff. But number one, just remembering the combos. Right. The memorization of that alone is impressive and hard for the average civilian/mortal to do. But more importantly, being able to pull them off with the hand-eye coordination, the timing, and the dexterity that's required, especially in those fighting games, like the Street Fighters and the Mortal Kombats and all those things where, you had to do certain swoop moves with the controller and press certain buttons. And, to be able to not only remember it, but then be able to physically do it is no task that the average civilian can just do. So that's impressive on many levels from somebody who knows that, that's impressive. It's impressive to me, not to the probably average normal, quote unquote, normal person, but to any gaming geek, you'd say, yeah, that's legit. That's some gaming cred right there.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. I've never had that level of dedication. When it comes to games, maybe I'd say maybe up until maybe age 15 I did, but it's just I'm not competitive to that degree. I'm noticing the more competitive guys I know, they tend to be the ones who really shine in terms of video games. But
yeah, well, me, it's not even competitive, but modern video games are kind of like movies, and you do have your favorite movies that you will watch again. And I have my favorite video games that I will replay. Usually it's going to be a year or a couple of years before I replay them. But you got to figure that Tomb Raider reboot, that came out in 2013. The second Tomb Raider is 2015, and then the last one was like 2019. So to replay a game that's 10 years old is not like, I wouldn't consider that competitive. And so, but to me, I enjoy these games sometimes more than I enjoy movies because it's like an interactive movie that you're the star of. And there's a lot of replayability and a lot of things where you can say, "Oh, I missed that last time I played the game. I didn't find this one thing here, and now that I've got this one, like in the Laura Croft one, you find a lockpick. As you're exploring the world, there's so many chests you can't open and so many lockers you can't open because they're locked. But if you do this one task, and this guy will give you the lockpick, now you can find all this extra gear in the game that makes it a whole new way of playing and things like that. So there are certain not only nostalgia rewards, but sometimes actual gaming rewards when you play it for a second time, having the benefit of hindsight and wisdom and just time to clear your brain, where it becomes sometimes an enhanced experience for me, anyways. But that's how games are now. They are built in with replayability.
Right, right, right. I mean, so much about video games has changed.
Yeah.
There's no way we could even do a show dedicated to that.
Well, we
Just
did.
so much has changed.
We
We did,
we did. But yeah, we
but,
spent 4 hours talking about 40 years of video games, and we've
and
scratched the surface.
even that can't contain it.
No, no, it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's
Yeah.
video games are a much bigger form and medium. Like it's a medium that keeps growing and accommodating more and more and more. I can't even imagine what they might be like in another 10 years.
Right. Well, it's probably VR and all that kind of crap is going to become so much more embedded.
Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah.
That's a bit beyond my pay grade.
Right. Right.
I don't need to be submerged to that degree. I don't think.
Right. Right. Another thing I did, and I'd never seen all three John Wick movies in their entirety. I'd seen pieces of two, I'd seen pieces of three, but over about a 2 or 3 day span, I ended up watching the entire John Wick trilogy, and that is just good. That's just good entertainment. It's there's nothing not to like about it. I can sit here and nitpick about some of the reality behind it, but you got to you got to be willing to suspend disbelief for a movie. But it's great entertainment. It is very much a new version of the Steven Seagal, Jean-Claude Van Damme type thing, where one guy has been wronged and now I'm going to just have to write everything through extreme violence. But there's so many cool things about how they do it, and the organizations of assassins and the codes and the rules and all those things make it interesting. So watching all three John Wick movies, since I had never seen all three of them in their entirety, was a fun little 3 or 4 day binge I also did during the break.
Right, right. No, John Wick. I mean, that's kind of become the modern, in many ways, the definitive modern action franchise, so to speak. Um, Personally, I feel the John Wick movies owe considerable debt to Cowboy Bebop, which they turned into a live action show. But less said about that one, the better.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, yeah. It's also the John Wick movies. I think are kind of a throwback to a subgenre of action from Hong Kong called heroic bloodshed. That was the subgenre that birthed movies like the John Woo films, The Killer, Hard Boiled, the ones with Chow Yun Fat. And for a lot of people who don't know, that subgenre goes well beyond the stuff that Chow Yun Fat did with John Woo. It's a whole subgenre of like Hong Kong B movies. And there's one that Chow Yun Fat did with a director named Ringo Lam called Full Contact. I was just discussing that one earlier with a friend. But if you look at those movies, I don't know if you've seen Hard Boiled and The Killer, Steve.
I don't think so.
If you see the Matrix, the gunplay in the Matrix came largely from those movies that John Woo did in the late '80s, early '90s, and then he came over to America and did Hard Target with Van Damme. He did Broken Arrow with Christian Slater. He did Face Off with Travolta.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But that style of the guns akimbo, the semi-automatics akimbo, and the slow motion balletic gunplay. Those are John Woo staples, and the Wachowski brothers basically took that wholesale, and they admitted the influence.
Oh yeah, there's no shame in that.
Yeah, but John Woo is sort of the father of modern cinematic gunplay, and the John Wick movies, they don't have the slow motion,
Right.
but the spirit is sort of
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah. The over the top action and fist fighting. Matter of fact, after I watched the first one and I watched half of the second one, I actually started fast forwarding through the gun scenes and the fighting scenes because they were super long. And you know what's
Yeah,
going on. It's this, a bunch of guys are trying to shoot at him. He's shooting back. Okay, I get it. Fast forward, fast forward, fast forward. Okay, we're almost at the end. Boom. You know what I mean? So I was able to watch
that's
them a little bit quicker because
well,
it.
pro, one of the criticisms I make about the John Wick films, even though I think the original films is sort of a classic now, but they do get a little the action does get a little repetitive. Even some of the moves that John does is sort of like it's the same thing as it's the takedown, and then he shoots him in the head when he's got him grounded,
Yeah,
and it's but it's the thing is the company was it 8711, I think,
something like
is
that.
it
Yeah.
yeah, the stunt team that does those films, and they basically are action designers. These are guys you hire to design the action for your
Okay.
movie, and you know it, the stunt work is great, and the fact that Keanu was actually doing it. So I would never complain too much about those films
No,
moving
I've not
forward.
got nothing to complain, but I was able to fast forward through, and like a lot of times my wife will fast forward through dialogue, and that drives me crazy. Oh, this is boring, blah blah blah. And they're no, I want to hear what they have to say. But when you know it's just going to be him shooting and punching and fighting for 5 minutes, I can fast forward through 4.5 minutes of that now, and
Right.
and then get on to the next thing where okay, now I'm done. It's kind of like a video game. There's a whole bunch of sequences you have to do before you get to the cut scene, which is now propelling the story a little bit further. It's like okay, I'm going to fast forward through the repetitive action. Let's get to the next cut scene. Let's get to the next dialogue, and let's see where the story's going. So,
Right.
but yeah, it was fun. It was wholesome entertainment. That John Wick franchise.
Right. Right.
Now you have not seen any of the new Willow yet.
Not yet, sir.
Yeah,
Not
so
yet.
I think there's one episode left, and I've been watching it. And this is one of the ones where I feel like they're putting a little bit too much modern humor in it. That would be my only complaint when I was talking about we need to kind of revitalize something for the kind of the Instagram hashtaggy generation. I feel like everything should be a balancing act where yeah you do have to update certain things, but when the characters are coming across very 21st century in what's supposed to be a medievalish time setting, it just feels it does kind of break that fourth wall for me a little bit. You know what I mean? So some of the humor being a little bit too modern to me spoils it to a degree, and that is my only main complaint. But I am enjoying it as a good series, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the season finale is going to be like, which I think drops this Wednesday.
Right. 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 Okay, so I'm definitely going to let you know. Maybe we can do a review of the
Yeah,
whole
we should do it.
season.
Yeah, when you finish the season, let's do it. Let's do an episode on Willow season 1 review.
Sure
What
thing.
we liked
Sure
and
thing.
didn't like. Now, speaking of John Wick and what I feel is similar but not completely derivative, but I also watched, which just recently dropped on Netflix, but I've seen Bullet Train. Have you seen Bullet Train?
Yes, I have.
Oh my God, that
Actually,
is just wholesome entertainment again.
it's a lot of fun to watch. I have to watch it again because I missed probably the first 25% of it. So I
Okay.
have to watch it again. But there was a lot of stuff in there that I did like though.
Yeah, well, I remember we were watching a movie, might have been Batman or one of those movies you and I saw together. And I remember seeing the trailer for this, and I was thinking, okay, is this Brad Pitt trying to do his version of John Wick? And it's not really quite a John Wick thing, even though it's a similar scenario. He is a different character than John Wick, and while he does pull off some fighting and some shooting, it's not to the same level and the same intensity. And I feel that being just such an ensemble piece, I feel every character there is was worth the screen time they took up. I didn't feel there was any dead weight or any dead air from any of the characters or dialogue that took place. It was a great ensemble piece, kept you guessing, kept you on your feet. It was a perfect blend of action and humor. It wasn't too much of either for me.
Right, right. In fact, I think I might watch that before I go to sleep tonight. That might be a good choice
Yeah,
as
yeah,
as the bedtime movie, so to speak.
yeah, yeah.
So
Good flick.
Right.
And then something that you saw a while ago and talked about it on the show, and I finally saw it now because it's on streaming, but I did watch Top Gun Maverick, and I absolutely loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And I think you're frozen again. Can you hear me, Scott? We are experiencing internet challenges right now, Scott.
I can hear you just fine.
All right, Scott, you froze on me. Your video is still frozen. It's a good frozen. It's a good still of you. It's a good snapshot. It captures you well. This is why I would prefer to do these in person. All right, he's back. He's back. Are you still there, Scott? You're back.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
All right. Yeah, but no, I enjoyed Top Gun Maverick. I remember asking you, did you need to see the first movie to see it? And you don't. The movie stands out on its own. I remember you saying it's very much like a Star Wars movie. And not only is it very much like a Star Wars movie, I mean, literally, the mission they were running was the Death Star trench and blowing up the exhaust portal. I mean, it literally was the Death Star end sequence.
I'm starting to think you can't really do modern aerial combat movies without some variation on the trench run. I'm starting to think
well, they could have done it a lot of different ways, but they chose to do a trench run with a, and it's just like,
but that movie has the best aerial combat scenes ever filmed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've been scanning a bunch of headlines about how that was one of the top grossing movies of 2022, but Avatar may have just pushed it down.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But yeah, no, it was quality entertainment. Great story. Great way to tie in the old to the new. The guy they got to play Goose's son was really good. He looked like he could have been related to Anthony Edwards. You know, especially with the mustache and everything, he was like Goose Jr. So I felt the actor was well cast, not only from a physical, resemblance, but playing a good character too. I think it was just really good casting in that respect. But yeah, really enjoyed Top Gun Maverick, and the fact that they reused the soundtrack, from the opening kind of electronic keyboard sounding to the Danger Zone soundtrack that was perfect. Nothing, no complaints about that whatsoever. So yeah, if you haven't seen Top Gun Maverick, it's now streaming. Go out and see it.
Right. Yeah, still my favorite blockbuster of the year, over last year rather. So yeah, I don't know, but I think we put together a nice little package for sort of our inaugural year opener.
Yeah. I got two more things to talk about. I don't know if you're sure if you're out of things to talk about, but I got. Mention a few things and then show a few things.
Sure.
Yeah. So when we talked about our favorite Christmas movies or movies that we feel are Christmas movies, you mentioned The Gremlins. And I remember saying, well, what's the Christmas connection? Because I hadn't seen The Gremlins. Well, I'm just going to say this. I tried watching The Gremlins. I haven't finished it. I got about 20 minutes in. But at least I know what the Christmas connection is now. And it is, the guy bought Gizmo as a Christmas gift for his son, who's basically the lead male character in the movie. And it takes place at Christmas time. So, yes, that's the Christmas connection, which dumb me didn't know because I'd never seen it. But I also did find it a little bit hard to watch because even though a lot of times I'll put these things on at night, like you kind of say, like your white noise to go to sleep to, I found it to be a little bit uncanny valley-ish for me just because it was too 80s. It wasn't like a comfortable 80s. It was almost like an awkward, painful 80s. So I couldn't just relax to it. But I do want to finish watching the movie. So I didn't get past the part where he basically Gizmo came home. And that's about as far as, and he's playing the piano with the guy. That's about as far as I got. So I do want to watch it.
Well, the movie takes sort of it does a 180 turn at a certain point. So it's kind of like you to really understand. It seems like one movie.
Okay.
With Gizmo, when the actual Gremlins come out, it becomes something a bit different. And
right.
If you finish it, you'll see what I mean.
Right. So I'd say I tried to watch that. Another thing I did just to rewatch because I'm fans of them and I'm looking forward to season 3. But I went ahead and rewatched The Witcher season 1 and 2 on Netflix, and I even watched the prequel mini series that came up that was called Witcher Blood Origins, which takes place like 1,200 years before the Witcher timeline. I enjoyed it, but there's a lot of flack going on on the reviews on the internet. I will talk about that on the news possibly next week, what some people are saying and what I agree with and don't agree with that. But it was still fun to watch. And so I became a bigger fan of The Witcher once the series came out because I tried playing the game, didn't like the game, watched the season 1 when it was new, fell in love with the game, and then been listening to the audiobooks. And now I've enjoyed season 1 and season 2. And so I'm a huge Witcher fan now. So I did get me some Witcher over the break. And so that's the last thing I'll talk about that I watched, but I do have a few things that I want to show as well. Okay. And one of them is, this was us talking about, when we talked about the Black Panther movie, right? Wakanda Forever. We were talking about how the Submariner has been in the Marvel world for a long time. So I got this cool and Mighty Marvel Masterworks, Namor the Submariner. And it's got a bunch of his early appearances. The first one is how he worked with the Daredevil. So there's a bunch of stuff in here. There's a good 9 comics that kind of chronicle the timeline of the Submariner through mostly the late 60s. So this is going to be a cool way for me to kind of catch up on some of the backstory of some classic Prince Namor, right? And it's cool, but reading old comics too, kind of like trying to watch the Gremlins, they kind of don't play out as well as we see things in the movies and modern iterations of things. Things happen a little too quickly. There's a lot between frames. There's a lot. It's just old comics. Just you got to take them with a grain of salt. You know, it's telling a story, but really, is that what you thought how things were going to go? But again, historical perspective and context. It was done in the late 60s. So that was some cutting edge, innovative stuff for the 60s. Nowadays, you look at it and this is kind of like, okay, really? This is like watching The Love Boat, you know? Are we really? This is embarrassing. You know? So, but yeah, it's good stuff. Now, this was at Collector Comics in Port St. Lucie, which you're also, you know, and I know. But I asked them, because do you remember the big comic books? Remember when they had those?
The Treasury editions.
Yeah, so like a normal comic book costs about $0.25. The big comic book was like $1.50, right? And it was like a literally giant-sized comic book. And I had a handful of those as a kid. So I was asking the guy, I go, have you got any of those old big comic books? Well, he had a bunch of them. I got this one here. This is a Battlestar Galactica. And they're wrapped and they're in pretty good shape. And so this was Marvel. You remember talking about how Marvel did everything, right? Marvel did Star Wars. They did all the movies. They did all the toys. You know, they did Transformers and Micronauts and ROM Space Knight and all kinds of stuff, right? So this was a Battlestar Galactica one that Marvel did. And the cover price on this was $1.50 from Marvel Comics. It's in good shape. And then the other one I got just because, but it's a Mighty Avengers giant comic book. Again, cover price of $1.50.
Treasury edition, yeah.
Yeah, this is the Marvel Treasury edition. And these were kind of cool because they were just big, giant comic books, physically big. They were taller, wider, thicker. There was more of a story. I remember having the Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back in the giant comic book form. I remember some crossover ones like Superman versus the Hulk, or Superman versus Batman, or Superman versus Spider-Man, and Batman versus the Hulk. You know,
yeah, I have Batman versus the Hulk, and in some cases, I think that those were actually reprints of older issues, but like they said, the Treasury edition is kind of made sort of for, I guess, to reintroduce kids to some of the older stories,
okay,
but in a very big way,
literally and metaphorically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was interesting there when this was just before Christmas, because I was also looking for a Christmas gift for a friend of mine. Sorry, I didn't get you a gift, Scott. I should have, but I feel bad.
I'm okay.
Your gift is my friendship, right?
I'm okay, man. Don't worry about that stuff.
I did buy you a drink today, right? So, but there was a guy there with his son who was like teenage. And his son is into old comic books. And so it's kind of neat when you see a newer generation. And again, he's going to the comic book store. And we were talking a little bit. I go, there's something neat about holding it in your hand and smelling it and touching it and feeling it. Like, to me, I don't like digital comics as much because you lose something, right? To me, growing up as a kid, a comic book was the thing you open up and you read, and you brought it to school, you snuck it into your notebook, and you brought it in your folder and you snuck it into class. But it was something you carried with you. It was very tactile. It was very tangible. So those are my histories of comics. And it's cool to see some of the younger generation not only being interested in physical comics, but in old comics too. So we had a conversation about that. So that was kind of neat to see that, like a father and son, where the son's into more of the older nostalgic ones, where the dad was into some of the newer stuff when you would think it should have been reversed. So
Right.
that was kind of cool. And actually, I talked to the guy. I said, so the guy who's running that, he's interested in doing an interview. So we're going to talk to him soon.
Sure.
One of these days.
And I know all those guys down there, so yeah, it'll probably be someone I have a conversation with millions of times already. So
Yeah,
that'll be
because
fun.
honestly, I am completely comic illiterate at this point. The last time I read a comic book on purpose was 30 years ago. So my knowledge of what's been going on in the world of comics is way out of date. While I'm a fan of the comic books I read in the 70s and 80s and maybe 90s, I'm out of the loop on what's going on in the print comic world, whereas, the Marvel cinematic way has been feeding me my comic entertainment and animation, watching the different animated series has been feeding my comic, fix. But as far as what's been going on in the world of paper, I'm way out of the loop. So I'd love to hear from people who are a little bit more versed in that area.
Right. So, no, I'm looking forward to that too if we can get them on there.
Absolutely. All right, well, it's been a good hour, a little bit over an hour. We'll wrap up. So this is our kicking off the new year, just talking about what we've been up to since our last end-of-year Christmas special. And we got more things to talk about in the coming weeks. And so hopefully those of you who are watching now or listening later will give us some feedback, what you thought about what we did today, what you'd like to see us do in the future. Say goodnight, Scott Wilson.
All right, good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Take care.